Should you be worried about Justin Herbert's long-term health? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com. That is linkedin.com to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today is Matt Williamson. You can follow him on Twitter at Williamson NFL. You can check out his new YouTube channel as well. It's Williamson NFL over there. Kate is off today, but she will be back on Thursday. So, Matt, today you and I are going to dive into some mailbag questions, and we got some really good questions, including this one from Jake, who wants to know, how concerned are you guys about Justin Herbert, his long-term health now that he's dealing with yet another injury?
It's a deep question in a way, because I'm very concerned with him for this year. And I think this news is not catastrophic, but it's really bad. I mean, one of the foundations of this team is going to be a rebuilding offensive line and a stud quarterback. And now you're getting none of that pretty much the entire rest of training camp / preseason. And I also think that injury, and people that know me, I hate talking about injuries because I'm not a doctor, but that injury lingers a lot. And sometimes you take 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, and it can be really, really frustrating. And I know when you get to game day, I've been told, and you have to, take a shot for it or something along those lines, that makes it worse. So maybe he can get out of getting to that point, and by week 1, it's great, but I bet it isn't. And therefore, I bet it lingers throughout much of this year. And much like his, draft mate, Joe Burrow, he has taken a real beating in this league up till now. And he's a big target. He's tough, but he's also had some bad luck. But big picture, I can't say, man, he's injury prone or his style of play lends itself to more injuries than anybody else. Like Will Levis holding the football and taking in a beating and not protecting himself, or Sam Howell, those guys worry me because their style of play. I also think Herbert, for his career, will probably always play behind a really good offensive line as long as Harbaugh's there. So that part I like, and I got to think his weaponry only gets better because I don't think it can get worse. So might be the time to invest in him in Superflex in some ways, but I think it could be a rough year.
I want to get to his price in just a second, but these are his list of injuries just since the start of the 2022 season. He had a rib fracture in September 15th. He had a labrum tear that required surgery after the 2022 season. He had a hand fracture that he suffered on October 1st. Then he had surgery on that hand later on that season. And then now he's got this plantar fasciitis. He's got a foot injury, Matt.
I might be wrong too.
Yeah. I don't want to say that he's injury prone, because some of these are just freak accidents, right? You hit your hand on a helmet. What are you going to do? But it does feel like these things are starting to pile up. And this is my thing with Burrow. It's like, once you get to a point where I just can't trust you to stay healthy for an entire 17-game schedule, and it's just baked in that you're going to miss time, I start to really knock your dynasty value. And it seems like other dynasty players are doing that. We've seen Justin Herbert just in the last year go from QB6 down to QB12. And I wouldn't be surprised, Matt, if by the time we get to September 1st, we're looking at him behind quarterbacks like Trevor Lawrence, who's QB14, maybe even somebody like Brock Purdy, who's QB15. Like, how far could his value potentially drop?
Well, I definitely think if that's the case, and maybe we're already in that neighborhood, I'm buying. I'm buying him, I think, at quarterback 12, 13.
Well, that's his current price tag. This
could
is
go
still
low.
July. Yeah, this isn't even factoring in the injury news that we already have. So I do wonder if it's going to be down to QB 14, QB 15 here in a couple of weeks.
Especially if a couple of the young guys, rookie, second-year guys, really step their game up and increase their stock, or a Deshaun Watson rebounds or something like that. I'm still taking him well ahead of Purdy, though, to be honest with you. Him versus Lawrence is absolutely a conversation, because I think Lawrence is probably my favorite buy low quarterback on the planet right now. I'm a believer, and I know we're going to talk Jags offense at 1.2. But they're never going to be a high volume passing attack. I mean, probably 3 years from now, 4 years from now, if him and Harbaugh are winning Super Bowls together, they're probably not going to throw the ball a ton.
The other thing that I don't want to factor this too much into the Justin Herbert conversation, but the wide receiver core is still terrifying to me. I mean, right? Yeah. Like Ed McConkey has got, I think he's left practice twice in the last week. Like that, and that was a concern for Ladd coming out of Georgia. Quentin Johnston is still running with the second team. That can change quickly. I mean, you can rebuild your wide receiver core in a year, so I don't want to overreact to that. But I do have some concerns that like this is just not going to be a very high volume passing attack, and I don't even know the efficiency, especially if Justin Herbert is banged up. So I'm not panicked, but I am starting to get a little nervous about Herbert's long-term health. That's all.
Yeah. I'm in one super flex league, and he's my top quarterback, and I don't like it. I got a lot of other startable dudes, but he's my franchise player, so to speak, and I don't like it. However, if I was rebuilding in that league, I think I'd put offers in for him right now.
So that's probably the way
love the player.
Yeah. That's what's so like his real life talent doesn't always line up to how he's valued in fantasy, because in the actual NFL, there's only 4 or 5 quarterbacks you're taking ahead of him. Maybe.
Agreed. Right.
Maybe. It's just, it hasn't necessarily translated to a lot of fantasy success over the last couple of years. Now let's talk about some running backs that we are interested in buying right now that could potentially be top 24 running backs. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which means you can get your tickets faster and easier than ever before. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer that it gets to first pitch. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. You can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, and theater events near you. And you can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event, and save even more when you choose a section and you let Gametime choose your exact seats. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Get daily insights to the best fantasy draft strategies so that you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Matt, we've got another question here about which running backs can you draft outside of the top 24 that could end up being values for you this year?
Yeah, I think where you look here is the really young guys and the really old guys by running back standards. Like names like Tajay Spears, Kendre Miller to some degree, Marshawn Lloyd, Chase Brown, a lot of these one or rookie or second year dudes that don't look like starters on the first week of August. I think we could probably come up with 5 or 6 of those names that are either an injury away or a couple of big games away from taking over the job. But probably the cheaper route is Ezekiel Elliott, Austin Eckler, guys like that smell funny now. Nobody wants them, they're shot.
Gus Edwards
is a good one. Absolutely. I think there's a lot of those type of dudes. I don't think Raheem Mostert fits that mold anymore because he was super productive, but if he gets a little old and smelly too, maybe he's,
he's being drafted as RB 36. So, he probably
I guess he counts.
right?
Yeah. Exactly. Old guys get thrown away too easy in Dynasty.
I've got a couple running backs that I want to ask you about that are being drafted, let's say outside the top 30, that we think could potentially be top 24 running backs this year. In the first name that comes to mind for me is James Conner, right? Older guy in an offense that I think should be a lot better. Now they drafted Trey Benson, so everybody's going to be excited about Trey Benson, but I could see James Conner grinding his way to a top 24 finish again this year.
I think I'd even predict it. I mean, maybe the last month of the season, he doesn't help you in your fantasy playoffs and things like that. And they move to Benson, they get eliminated. Or we know Connor has an injury history, but it's not as bad recent as people like to remember. I mean, his Pittsburgh days are a lot worse than his Arizona days. But he catches the football. The style of the game flow doesn't really matter. He's influenced if they're winning big or if they're losing big. And he's still really good. And frankly, I'm very impressed with that coaching staff, and especially their offensive coaching staff. They have a diverse run package that should be even better this year. I think I'm buying Arizona offense. Their defense is bad.
In some of these best ball drafts I'm doing, I'm loving like the Kyler Murray, Trey McBride stack because you can get it relatively cheap. And I think there's a lot of upside there. A couple more running backs I want to mention. Aaron Jones, RB33. I mean, he's older. He's 29, but I mean, it feels like he's the clear-cut RB1 in Minnesota. And I actually thought he looked pretty good down the stretch last year, Matt.
Yeah, I think that's a great neighborhood to shop, is Connor, Jones, that type of neighborhood where these are still good football players. There's nobody directly ahead of them on the depth chart. You would think enough volume is there mixed with enough talent. I think Aaron Jones is a great name. I mean, he's never been a massive workload guy, but he doesn't have to be because he catches the ball so well.
A couple other ones I wanted to mention to you. What about, we're getting down there a little further, Jerome Ford, RB40. I just have doubts that Nick Chubb is going to be Chubb.
I don't think Ford's very good, though. I'm not impressed with the player.
Yeah, neither am I. But could he still be a top 24 running back without having to do all that much?
Yeah. I mean, the true answer to this question is there's a lot of names. Because being a top 24 running back,
it's not that hard, right?
It's not that hard, right.
It's just, how can you do it as cheap as possible?
Exactly. Or maybe I take the approach in redraft that I want 3 or 4 of these names and it sorts itself out and I'm loaded everywhere else. You know what I mean? I would totally understand that approach.
I got one more that I wanted to mention to you because I actually really like this player. Dameon Pierce is being drafted as RB65. Okay. He's 24 years old. He had a fantastic rookie season, and he should be on an offense that's everybody expects Houston to be really good. And they run, I mean, we know that Bobby Slowick is going to run the ball a lot in the 5-yard line. Like, is it possible that we just get to early on in the season and Joe Mixon looks cooked and Dameon Pierce is the better running back?
I love this conversation. I mean, because I have a lot of Pierce stock. I can't give up on him, and I'm not going to dump him for nothing because I really liked him coming out of school, loved him coming out of school, and liked his first season. I think Mixon is cooked. He's never been great in protection. The Bengals over like the last 3 or 4 years have the fewest long runs in the whole league. There's not a lot of explosiveness there. And that Houston situation was weird last year with Pierce, and maybe he's just in the doghouse and they don't like him for whatever reason, but maybe even ends up on another team. But I think it's noteworthy that the Texans O-line, which I think is very talented, led by Tunsil and Shaq Mason and those guys, was the most injured offensive line in the entire league. Yes. It's probably going to get better from that regard.
I remember, listen, not to bring your Steelers into this, but I remember a game they played against Pittsburgh earlier in the year where I think all 5 offensive line starters didn't play at one point in that game. I think that was the game.
Definitely
they all got hurt, and they still scored 30 points. And they've done some stuff to improve their offensive line. Juice Scruggs comes back from an injury. They drafted Blake Fisher, who I liked a lot out of Notre Dame. Like, it's hard for me to imagine this offensive line being worse than it was last year. Right. I think they're going to be better. And if you got a 24-year-old who is proven, why not just throw out a late round pick and gamble on Dameon Pearson? In fact, I was in a draft last night, Matt, where he went undrafted in a dynasty draft. Undrafted because he's
dynasty draft. I could see it in a typical home redraft league. He probably won't get drafted. But
he's RB65 right now.
Yeah, I mean, your favorite team, the Cowboys. Like, you'd love for him to go get Pierce, right? or the
I mean,
Giants
he would instantly be their
Raiders.
best running back on their team. Instantly.
Yeah, I think so too. I think he's still good, and he's not bad in protection or the passing game. He runs hard. I don't know what he did wrong.
One more name. I just throwing this one out there. What's happening with Miles Sanders in Carolina? Because I mean, obviously, it's not going to happen with him in Carolina with them drafting Jonathan Brooks, and they still have Chuba Hubbard. But is Miles Sanders in your mind somebody that could potentially get dealt like here in the next 2 or 3 weeks and still be fantasy relevant?
I wouldn't count on it. I think the getting dealt part could certainly happen. Maybe after a couple running back injuries happen in the preseason. I mean, I'm thinking for like a 7th round pick. I mean, or a future 7th. I mean, like next to nothing to take on his salary, which was a bad one to begin with. It was a bad signing.
It was a bad, but it wasn't like he was a bad player in Philadelphia. Now, I think that Philadelphia situation boosted his talent, right? Like he's not as good as he looked in 2022. But I'm telling you, there are some teams in the NFL where he would be their best running back. Dallas, maybe New York, right? Like, so I do wonder, is Miles Sanders one of these former Pro Bowl running backs that could get dealt and suddenly have a lot more value than what we think?
He has a lot of natural talent. I mean, he really does. And I've owned a lot of stock of him over the years too. So it's not that like I dislike him. It's just when you fall off that much where you can't do a thing, it scares me. But I know what you're saying. You're like, I'm going to trade you 2 of mine for 1 of yours. I'm like, throw Miles Sanders in. And
exactly. Because
just make the number for it.
And you know what I like about these type of trades, Matt, and you, I'm sure you have the same way. You're going to know very quickly whether you can cut him or not, right? Like if he's not dealt and he's still on the Panthers roster in week 2, move on from him. Who cares? Like it costs you nothing. But on the off chance that he does get traded to a good situation, he's proven before that he can put up big numbers. He's relatively young. It's a dart throw that's probably going to cost you nothing in your leagues.
And traded would be great, but even if teams just wait it out and say you're going to cut him,
exactly,
and we scoop him up the next day once waivers goes through.
Perfect.
The same deal. If we don't get him, we don't get him.
All right, we've got a lot of rookie receivers, Matt, that have been. And
Mark, needless to say, we have running back injuries on the horizon.
Correct. Yes, absolutely. Yep. We've got a lot of rookie receivers that are having fantastic training camps, but one receiver that has not gotten a lot of hype so far is Brian Thomas. Should you be concerned? We'll talk about that next. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to make sure that you have quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you hire the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In any given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Everydayers, Kate and I will be back on Thursday and Friday, getting you ready for week 1 of the NFL preseason. We'll discuss players that we are interested to see, maybe some of our favorite matchups. So make sure you guys tune in for that. But Matt, this final question here comes from Craig. He wants to know, with Malik Neighbors getting so many highlight videos on Twitter and the Brian Thomas updates not really happening, should we be concerned about his training camp performance?
I think the answer is not one bit. And if by chance anyone is, jump on it, because I was extremely high on this player, size, speed, all of it. I told you how much I'm excited about Lawrence's future still. I think he's still going to be one of the better quarterbacks in the league. I don't think Gabe Davis is any kind of obstacle whatsoever, but kind of poses as one. And Kirk is fine and Ingram are fine, but they're not special. You know what I mean?
Well, Kirk plays a different role.
They're not even really the same player.
Yeah, completely different.
So you sort of mentioned this off the air when we said we were going to bring this up, and I couldn't agree more that it's August 6th. And this guy is a big, fast, raw player who ran a very limited route tree at LSU. Like any good draft analysis would have told you, he's not going to burst on the scene. He's not going to run out routes and comebacks like Jerry Rice. You know what I mean? Like these things are going to take time. They didn't ask a lot of him. I'm not implying that he's smart or isn't smart.
It's just
can't
raw.
learn. It's just raw. I mean, his role at LSU was not that expansive. It was big, go down the field, run a handful of routes at most. So, of course, they're going to ask him to do more, let alone all the adjustment that everybody else in the league has. And the fact that he's not lighting it up like Neighbors or Harrison, I don't care one bit. I really don't. I'm not even expecting a ton out of him in his rookie year.
And I know some of the reports were that he was running behind Gabe Davis and Christian Kirk in training camp practices, which is exactly what you would expect. I mean, they paid a lot of money for Gabe Davis. I mean, we can debate whether that was a smart move or not, Matt. I think you and I both have the same opinion. But it would be shocking if Brian Thomas was running behind your two highly paid wide receivers. Patience here, right? Like the Jags.
Absolutely.
I think the Jags traded back in round 1 and took Brian Thomas. They didn't draft him at their original spot. And I think that was right. I think he was somebody that you draft with the idea that he's going to help us in 2025 and 2026, probably not right away. So I just moving
and even
on.
this year, he probably is going to run fast down the sidelines and they'll throw him some jump balls and stuff like that too. But the real stuff's coming next year, probably.
And I want people to remember, like, just training camp hype hardly means anything. Like I remember, was it back in 2021? Remember the Jamar Chase stuff? He was really struggling with drops. He couldn't get used to not having the line on the football, the stripes in the football, and everybody was concerned about Jamar Chase. And then what, he had 1,400 yards as a rookie. Was one of the best rookie receivers we've ever seen. Like,
right. And Chase was a much more developed receiver, even though he's super young, coming out of the same school.
I love training camp, but I think we, especially in the media and fantasy football players, we overrate the importance of training camp and the impact that it has in the regular season all the time.
And a little rule here, I'm not going to throw my Pittsburgh media brethren under the bus, but when we meet in the local watering holes at night, some of the questions they ask, I'm like, what are you guys even watching? Or the biggest thing is, to no fault of their own, somebody has to write something every day. You know what I mean? And there's many practices and many 24-hour cycles in any team's training camp where there's nothing to write. You know, there just isn't that much excitement, right? And so you have to write something.
Yeah. So don't give up on Brian Thomas. Just a little update on where he's being drafted right now. Our wide receiver 31. He's going after some young receivers, including Jordan Addison, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Xavier Worthy, all being drafted ahead of him. One spot ahead of Christian Watson. I would just rather have Brian Thomas than Christian Watson pretty comfortably.
I would rather have him than all those guys except Smith-Njigba.
That's because you hate Jordan Addison.
That's right. That's a different subject altogether.
It's fine. So we're saying don't give up on Brian Thomas. No. Don't sell the shares for 75 cents on the dollar. We still believe in Brian Thomas. And I think preseason will be a good opportunity for him. I'm excited to see what he looks like when he can get out on the field, just use his athleticism, because Matt, he's going to be more athletic than every single cornerback that's covering him or trying to. You
mentioned the Neighbors highlight reel plays. Highlight reel plays are coming. I don't know if consistency's coming. I don't know if sharp out routes are coming, but highlight reel plays are definitely coming. And I don't know about you, but I was taking him ahead of Worthy in my rookie drafts.
So was I.
Okay.
So, all right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen today. Now go listen to the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Get daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies so that you can win your league this season. You can find the link to Locked On Fantasy Football right in the bio in the description here, so you don't even need to go search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'd like to thank Matt for jumping on the show. Of course, the Williamson Wednesdays. Go check out his YouTube channel at Williamson NFL. You can follow him on Twitter as well. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.